Hi everyone. Greetings from sunny Brunswick Heads, and you know, lots of love to you wherever you are. So I just want to honor the traditional custodians of that land, but also the Virago people of the Bundjalung Nation, which is where I am. And I just really also want to honor their suffering, their ongoing and historical suffering, and their survival and their death practices. And when I come to deliver this to you, even though I'm sitting here like this, but with me come all the dead people that I have worked with, and all their families, and all their capacity and courage. We all come to offer you this session. It's not just me. And in reflection of that, I also honor, that you're sitting there, but behind you are all the people who have fed into you personally and professionally if you do that work. So even though there's however many of us here, we never come alone. We're always a body of experience. And it's that experience that I'm offering to you. And I hope that, if some of it will land, some of it will be seeds that will grow in time to come. But what a lot of people have is it affirms for them what they already know, or what they thought but were a bit apprehensive about. So just let it all come. Don't get stuck on anything that pisses you off. Just take what you need from whatever I have to offer. So what we're looking at in this session is that sort of what happens after death and that process in between. So for the last 25 years, I've been very busy here assisting people to do it themselves, do the whole thing without a funeral director. And in New South Wales, that has been quite simple, and I very rarely encountered any opposition to that. So what that has done, that has really affected our whole culture of death and dying and after death care and ceremony. And what I see without fail is that when people are offered those options, the practical options, the legal options, the social options, when that is all on the table for them, they will make the right decisions for them. And it's not one size fits all, as we all know, anybody who works in that field or has experienced several deaths. So for each death, there's a sort of an equation, which is who the person is and how they die, who you are and your relationship to them and your familiarity with death will give you a response. And so it's that sort of individual response that you also have to take into each family that or person who's dying that you work with. Just because you've had 10 on a roll that have all done the same thing, you still have to come neutral and clean to each one so that that family can make the right decisions for them. So in order to try and make this a little bit simpler, last night when I was preparing, I made a little drawing, and Lynn is going to put that on the screen. And you can either copy that drawing if you want, you can take a screenshot if you're technical, or you can just look at it and see where it goes.
I can also pop it in the chat box.
Okay, we'll pop it in the chat box. Great. So I'm going to make it a bit bigger. There it is. So you'll see on there that it says a process after death. And you have two options, director, but the third option is you can work as a team with the funeral director. And ideally, you would have already sourced a funeral director or a funeral guide that will assist you in the way you want, that you won't just be ringing them, especially if you've got an expected death. You will have had time to find the one who you know will give you the sort of service that you want. So there are some things involved like body care, paperwork, coffin or a shroud, transport ceremony. But a lot of people are having, where the disposal says burial or cremation, so a lot of people are doing direct delivery, or it may be called something else there. So they're sending the person off to be cremated, getting the ashes back and doing a ceremony later. And especially with the COVID situation, some people are opting for that, and they're not doing a ceremony at the time of death. They're waiting, which you can always have more than one ceremony, but I think a ceremony, it can save you 12 months of therapy or 12 months of anguish. You are ceremonies, you are calling in the divine, you are creating something that is profound, and it's a collective experience, even if it's on Zoom, but you are much better to do something rather than nothing. That I say that without any hesitation. And I'm just about to do the Day of the Dead here, and we're trying to stream that for people. That's a ceremony once a year, because so many people have missed the death of the person that they care for, and the ceremony. So I'm really a great believer in the healing capacity of ceremony. So you can, I'm sure you've all got that now, so we'll come back to me. Okay. So can I just ask, and you'll have to just raise your hand, who has organized, who is a professional death worker? Okay. And who has organized a funeral for someone that is in their family? So has anybody not organized anything? Yeah. Carrie, you've never organized anything. Okay, great. So that's good. I just don't want to teach people how to suck eggs. It's just sort of, you know, too patronizing. Okay, so Carrie, you might want to be sitting at your desk then and taking notes. That's right. Okay. So the consideration is, so someone dies and then it's sudden or expected. And those deaths will create a different response, as most of you know. So if it's a sudden death, if you are present and it's a family member or someone, and you wake up, someone's died in the bed next to you, or you've come downstairs and they're still in the chair, or some other set of circumstances where you are there, someone's died suddenly and you're there with the body, then absolutely take the time to allow that shock and any other emotions that arise, to let them pass through you. And the best way to do that is either to sit down in a comfy chair, in an armchair, and let that chair support your body so that you can just be in the emotional and physical response that your body is having to that death. Or some people will drop to their knees in shock. That's often what happens. So, because you will only get that time once. So even if it's a sudden death, there's nothing you can do for the person if they're clearly dead, but you may want to see in case they've just died, and then of course you would call the ambulance. But if they're dead and they've been dead for a few hours and that's pretty clear to you, the best thing you can do is to calm yourself and have self-care. So it's a bit like the oxygen on the aeroplane, which is now a distant memory. But you put the oxygen on yourself first, and then you look after the others. So the calmer you are, the more you can process that shock, the better you're going to deal with the rest of the situation, with whatever unfolds. So that's the first piece. If it's an expected death, so someone's been dying at home and they die, the same thing is true, because you will still be in an unfamiliar situation. So even though you've been prepared for that death for some time, when it happens, it can still be not a dramatic shock, but it can still be a shock to the system, especially if you haven't experienced a death before. But often it can be one of the most beautiful and profound experiences you can have, to be with someone and to watch them die, and for that to be lovely experience. So whatever you're dealing with, it's all about you. It's about calming your senses, experience the emotion, crying if you want to, but just experiencing that moment as fully as you need to. And if you are, if someone rings you and says, I've just found so-and-so dead, then talk to them as a resource, calm them down. Don't join them in their shock, even if you are shocked. You're secondary, and you have the opportunity to calm them in a way. Is that making sense? Because everything that flows on from that moment is very different, like any experience, if you're grounded, if you're prepared for it. So I'm just going to cover sudden death and the options around that first, and then we'll do expected. So if you come across the body, take the time you need. If it looks like a murder or something like that, then you're probably best not to touch the body, but you can still look after yourself. Sometimes when people have killed themselves, especially if that involves hanging, then people will rush in and they will cut that person down. They won't think about, oh, we shouldn't touch the body. The police will want to see it in situ. People just cut that body down and bring it to rest on the ground. That's a natural response. So, don't worry too much about what's going to happen. Just be in your response to that. Generally, then the police will come and a funeral director will come as part of the tender, not tender that we all know and love in Port Kembla, but tender like the tow truck drivers. They will come with the police, ask some questions, and then they'll take that person's body away. So that's why I'm saying, if you take the time to settle yourself first, you're still going to have to deal with the questions, but you will have had time with that person, especially if it's someone that you've been married to for 20 or 30 years, or it's someone that you love. And also if it's a child, sometimes people come in and find at home and they've found their child has died through natural causes or through misadventure. But you will never get that time back. And it is very precious. So they will take the body away, and generally they will autopsy to find the cause of death. It used to be done in hospitals locally, and it would take a few days. But now a lot of the bodies where we are getting sent to Newcastle, and that autopsy can take a week to 10 days. So you've got plenty of time in there to organize what you want to have happen. And one of those considerations is to think about, when the body comes back, do we want to spend time with it? And the answer is yes, because you've had that delay between the death, the sudden death, and the receiving the body. And that is like this incredible warpy limbo where you're sort of already organizing things, but you don't know when it's coming back. So what you really want to connect back into the emotional response of that person's death. You want to see their body. And so for an autopsy, often the cut is like this, around there and down the front of the body. And so we have done home funerals with bodies that have been autopsied. But what we have also done is sent them to a funeral director to be stitched up nicely before the family will wash and dress that body, because you need to know what condition it is when it gets back, because sometimes they staple that incision, and that's not so pleasant for people to look at. But the stitching, and we're very lucky here, we've got great morticians who over those years have working with families in a way like that. So that's all they will do, is restitch that person's wound, and tidy that body up in a way that makes it presentable, or a little bit more presentable for the family. So it's up to you. And I have seen some incredible kindness from those morticians and funeral directors. What I used to do was ring the hospital where the autopsy was and say, can you please do a nice job, because the family are going to view that person. And invariably they would, but now it's not at our local hospital, so I don't think we've got a chance really at the morgue. So when you get it back, then especially if people, because those of us who have been with dead bodies and people know that a whole lot of physiological things happen, not only to the body itself, but also to us. So it makes it much more real. It allows us to process our emotions with that person there. So we might want to go to the funeral directors to wash and dress that body with assistance or without it. We need to know to be prepared for what that body looks like. So it's no good just sort of going in expecting it all to be nice. So generally what I do is I go in, I have a look, and then I come out and I explain to everyone what to expect. And I do that in the kindest, realist way I can. But I find that by doing that, giving them a little bit of a heads up, what it does, it allows their nervous system to take it in, have a little relax, and then to go in, rather than be in there, pull the sheet back, and it's a big shock for them, because often I'm not attached to that person. So I'm trying to do for them what I would want someone to do. Basis of really all my work is to do for others what I would want someone to do for me if I was in that situation for the first time. It's a really simple way to proceed. And then you could take the body home for a vigil so a lot of people who have died elsewhere, like in an accident, or they went to the shop, they had a heart attack, they got taken away. A lot of people want to bring that person home. That can be really important for them on a psychological level, that they return home before their body goes to be cremated or buried. So can you get the feel of what I'm doing? You're really dancing with people with care in a situation because what they don't want to do is find out later they could have done these things and no one told them. And we've all heard that from people once they experience something with people like us, and then they say, oh, I wished I'd met you when my mum died 20 years ago, or I wished I'd known that was possible. So it's really about care. So then during that time, you're also deciding about what sort of coffin, the conversation that we just had, and behind you too is the beautiful wicker coffin that you might can everybody see that? In sector improvement and innovation. That's absolutely an improvement on what we've had for so long, for sure. So cardboard, can build your own. A lot of people take incredible comfort and pride in someone in their family or community building their own coffin. The specifications are very simple, and you don't need to line it in plastic, which is often what happens. It just needs to have an absorbent liner. So, but now of course we can bury in shrouds on community grounds, not only religious grounds. And in Victoria, they're very lucky. Anybody from Victoria? Yeah, so people are cremating in shrouds. which is fantastic because that's very comforting. But of course, seeing a body in a shroud is not everyone's cup of tea. It can be confronting for people. And so it's, again, it's a dance. Just because you can be gung-ho with the new way to do death, and yeah, we've got all these things going on now, you can have a much better time. But that's not the case for everybody. Some people are very traditional and they want what they think is the right thing. But one of the big things to know for anyone that's environmental or sustainable or eco is that most of those consumer commercial coffins are lined with plastic between the veneer and the timber and the fabric. In there is heavy duty black plastic. So the body will not dissolve into the ground if it's been buried, and you will be burning plastic. So any argument from anyone about you have to have plastic, that is not true. You can have an absorbent lining because of course it's there to try and avoid any leakage of body fluids. Okay, so you've got that going on. And one of the other things I find helpful is that you can participate as much or as less as you like. So for some people, just to be in the room where that washing and dressing is happening may be enough. They don't actually need to be physically involved in that, doing it themselves, but just by sitting there, that's as much as they can cope with. Or they may even just be able to be in the house, but they can't be in the room. So again, you're dancing with each individual person, with their response to that particular loss. And you never know what people bring to that moment or what they're looking at. So for example, a lot of people are carrying cancer in their body. They may be in that process themselves, and that death is really stirring things up for them, because there's nothing like looking at a dead body to make something very real like death. So again, when in the death walker training that I'm teaching, these are the tenets of that. One is, to be present, whatever that means to you, to be neutral, to be kind, and then to respond. So you're responding to whoever is in front of you and the set of situations, the situation that you've got right there. But coming neutral is a really invaluable asset to you. So neutral means, you're not in the future, you're not in the past, you're in the now. You're not planning ahead or carrying baggage. You're just responding to the situation that's right in front of you. And neutral allows you to move wherever you need to go with those people. So some people think neutral means cold and uncaring, but in fact I would say it means the opposite. It means that you are super caring, but you're not bringing up a predetermined attitude. So for example, a lot of people want to know what's the right thing to say to people. And the safe bet for a few years was proposed as, I'm sorry for your loss, because it's inoffensive, it's respectful. But if you are the 10th person in a row on that particular day that has said that to that person, it's worthless. And in fact, it's an insult, because it doesn't carry anything from meeting them in that moment. So sometimes I meet people who I know there's been a sudden death, and sometimes I just look at them and I just sort of go like that. And that I'm meeting them where they're at, because I can see how they feel when they're right in front of me. So finding the right words isn't the key. Finding the right response to that person is your starting point, right? Okay. So that's the sort of stuff around sudden death. And of course, you would be checking to see if they left any instructions, if they'd filled in a death plan, if they had left funeral instructions, if there were instructions in the will about how they wanted to be disposed of, if they'd said anything to anybody. And generally, what happens is that you're planning for a funeral, and if you are smart family, you would invite someone like us into that room, in that consultation at the kitchen table, to provide all the options for you to consider in order to make informed decisions and create a ceremony or a situation that will serve that family the best it can. And sometimes it's a compromise between who wants what and how you're going to do it. Sometimes there's two ceremonies so that everybody can feel that they've got it covered. Sometimes a small private one, a big community one. But taking, I'm just going to backtrack because I realized I didn't cover the rest of the body care. So if the body has had an autopsy from a sudden death, then you can still wash and dress it. And it can be, families do it on their own without any assistance, as long as they've got a bit of savvy. But otherwise, often they invite me, not so much now, but years ago, people would invite me to just assist them in that experience, because they just felt if they had someone that was more familiar, that would help them. But generally, I try not to do very much, because again, my work is all about empowering the people who are dealing with their own loss rather than doing it for them. And that can, at the moment, some of the training, especially in America, is about the doula, the end-of-life person, doing all the things and sort of carrying the family along. But great, if that's what that family need. But what I've seen over those 25 years, over and over again, is how courageous people are, even from one moment to the next. And also what an incredible capacity people have to step up, to be able to do something in the moment that confronts them, that half an hour ago or yesterday they never thought they would be able to do. So has anybody had that experience where someone said, oh, I can't do that, you know, I can't wash them? But even if you just get them in the room and you can say, well, look, if you can come with me, I can get you there. But of course, then you have to be trustworthy in order for them to put their trust in you. So the most important thing you can cultivate as a person, as a death worker, is authenticity, honesty, integrity, transparency. So if you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know the answer to that, or I haven't actually done that before. So we'll all have to do it together. And when I first started, I didn't look to do it. It just happened to me. Death offered itself, and I like an adventure. So I just said, okay, yeah, we can do that. And so I didn't have any training. I didn't have anybody to turn to. There wasn't even the internet to consult or check in with. But I was just like, oh, well, I can only do my best, and I'm all there is. So let's do it together and we'll get there. And in a way, that was just, I think, by far the best way to learn, because if you're all in it together rather than doing it for them. And over again, I've just been, you know, completely humbled by, you know, like the parents' capacity to wash who has died in whatever way. That's sort of around the sudden death. And expected death is, and oh, maybe I'll just take a breath. So yeah, let's just chill out, because it's sort of intense. It's sort of light, but it's sort of intense. And of course, it could be, some of you may be in that situation where you're looking at this for yourselves, or you're looking at it for family members. And yeah, so I just really want to honor that it's a lot of bombardment. Okay, so when we're dealing with expected death, some people think, oh, that's it won't be a shock. But as I said before, it still can be a shock for some people when that person actually dies, whether that's when they're in the room with them or if they hear about it. So often in my community, I have people say to me, oh, such a shock when my mum died. And I said, oh, were you expecting it? And they said, yeah, I was expecting it, but she was only 97. And I cannot tell you the amount of people that when they've got someone who's over 80 and they're shocked that that person has died. I mean, it sort of beggars belief, but human beings have this incredible capacity, especially when love is involved, to not see things as clearly as they are. And that works on all levels, you know, with children, with partners, and with parents. So if someone is expected to die, then Jim, up until the COVID situation, most people were able to travel and to be with that person. And so a lot of people got to say what they needed to say, express what they needed to say. And of course, for sudden unexpected, it doesn't always mean that person was a nice person, the person who's dying or dead. And sometimes they've been, I walk into the house and, you know, someone has died, and I sit with the family, we're at the kitchen table, and I say, okay, so how is it? And sometimes people say, well, we're really glad that that person has died, because they made our life a misery, or they were cruel to us, or, you know, or worse. And so the thing about coming neutral to those people, instead of swamping them with the, so people say, oh, you know, my mum just died, and I say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. It must be terrible for you. So I'm already setting up a thing where, no, they've got to then confront me and say, well, actually, no, we're glad she's dead. And for some people, that can be easy. But for others who are polite, or who've been well brought up, or have lived with that repression for their whole life because that parent has been a tyrant, they're unlikely then to say they're glad that she's dead, and they feel liberated and free, and they're really looking forward to putting them in the ground. They're not going to say those things to me. They're going to just keep it to themselves, because I'm not inviting them to tell me how they really feel, because I'm already loading it with, oh, it's so terrible. So again, coming neutral and waiting to see what you're dealing with. And the more open you are, the more they will share with you. And often I would sit there at the kitchen table with people in that consult, and it might be a 2 or 3 hour conversation with people. And I'm sitting there and I'm just about to go, but I find myself still sitting there. And at first I never understood it, and then eventually they would say something that they thought was a very small piece of information. And I would say, and you didn't think that was important to tell me that before, because it can often be the key to the whole family dynamic, or the key to that person's life. And so they're trying to do their best, but the more open you are, the more they will give to you, and the better job you can do if you're a celebrant planning that funeral, or you're a home funeral guide, which I'm using that term. That's a sort of the term they use in America for people who, like me, like some of you who are doing that work, who don't see themselves as funeral directors. They're more like a guide. And in America, they have to use that for legal reasons. But I quite like the word guide. I think, you know, because they're on an unknown journey and you're guiding the way for them. So I've always liked it myself. And of course, it's a traditional role. It is the role that someone always played in communities and families, that someone with experience and familiarity would guide that family through that process. But now with the industry, you know, the choice of words is interesting because they're directing where you go rather than guiding you. And so, I mean, some of us can take that tag as funeral directors, but I find the older I've got, the more I realize how important language is. So I'm trying not to say anything at any point that I don't actually mean. So in conversations, I never say it's heartbreaking unless I really can see that that person is completely heartbroken. I don't bandy that as a general term. I very rarely use the word unbearable, because those people do have to bear that pain, and in a way it's their right to feel that pain, because I see that is their love transformed. And so I've been with parents who have been over the body of their dead child and are heartbroken in that experience, and I hold myself there to bear witness to them, and because I think that is their right to feel that pain fully, because if they feel it fully, they can often move with it and keep going. But if they swallow it back down, or if they're stopped in some way from feeling that, it's a bit like running a race or an extreme sport, that, you know, you've really got to put the energy in to complete it or to work through each stage of that to get to the next stage. And if people always, you know, tidy you up when you're messy, you know, it's a disservice to not let people feel their emotions fully. And in other cultures, of course, they're much more, you know, those displays of emotion are much more out there. And you've got people where people come to keen at the ceremony in order to encourage others to cry. But what the white world has is this repressed, you know, especially for men, that they don't cry in public, they don't feel those emotions. And I've spent a lot of time supporting men in situations to view the body, to be with that person, to be in vigil, to be speaking at the ceremony, because I think it's one of the most courageous things a man can do, is to stand at the funeral of someone that they love and cry and not apologize for that, so that they don't go, oh, I'm sorry for crying. I mean, that's their tears of love. And often, you know, I'm encouraging people to put their tissues in the coffin with that person, because that's the expression of love for that person. I mean, obviously, if they're a bit snotty, they have to make that decision. But if they've just been crying and they're just tears, you know, those tears mean something, because we don't cry tears for people that we don't really care about. We just say, oh, that's a shame, I'm sorry to hear they're dead. But when it affects you in a full way, those you know, they're really valuable, to feel all those emotions, to be a whole feeling person. And each death, I mean, recently, like, a friend of mine died in a sudden, shocking way, and I loved her so much. And even after 25 years, it broke me open in a way that I've never felt for anyone else in that death. And unfortunately, I was very grateful for that, even though it took me to my knees. I knew the value of feeling those emotions fully, and I was grateful that I loved her that much, that it hurt that much. And, you know, sometimes at the ceremony, I'm saying, you know, it's a scar that we have now, that is a scar on the inside. and sometimes we choose whether we want to share that loss with someone else, because I have people all the time saying to me, oh, so my cousin just died, my mother just died, because they know that they can do that. It's safe for them to talk to me, anywhere, at the park bench, at the beach, at the farmer's market, and because I'm not going to swamp them, or I'm not going to know, I'm not going to be afraid in how I respond. And you hear it all the time from people where they say, oh, I saw people changing aisles in the supermarket so that they didn't have to come towards me in the aisle, because people are unfamiliar. And so the more familiar you become, the more you grow that capacity to be courageous, to have those conversations, and to be present with those people, not just in a consultative way when you're employed to do that, but within your families, within your communities, especially if that is the death of a child and everyone else around you is, just, they're like this because people think it's their worst nightmare, or they judge it as the most extreme kind of loss. But each loss has a different equation. So if you've been married to someone since you were 16 and you've been married for 60 years and you've had a long, happy relationship, and whether you've had children or not, but that person is like half of you. And when they die, it's like half of you dies. And so that for that person is much more painful than someone when they've lost a child and that child hasn't been in their life so long. And you can't equate it against, oh, have they got other children? Which is we all feel better, don't we? If a child dies and the family have got other children. You just have to be with that person right there. And if you give them what is needed in that moment, and often as a worker coming into those situations, especially with sudden death, you're not the police asking questions. You're not the funeral director getting all the forms filled in. If you're coming as a family person or as a celebrant, you are the first person who's offering, deep care for that person. I know that those of us that are working in the funeral role, in whatever capacity that is, we are now coming with that same sort of care. But I can't say that for the regular profit-driven funeral industry that has created itself, especially for some of the big conglomerates. I mean, different for small community. So washing and dressing that person, if they've been ill, then washing and dressing the dead person is just a continuation of that care. It's not really, it shouldn't be a great shock. And in someone in pain, they're not suffering. And it can be really great to revisit that. So often people say, oh, I saw them when they died. I don't really need to see them again. But some of you may have had that experience where you go or you bring that body home after 3 days when it's been on the cold plate or in the fridge. And the suffering sort of has dropped away. So they look much more relaxed because all the muscles are relaxing. And sometimes people look much better than they did when they were alive, because, I mean, I'll probably look great because I'm so wrinkly that when I'm flat laying down, all that wrinkles are going to drop away and I'm going to probably look fabulous. So, and I think that's a case for many of us, and we're really a reflection of how we've lived our lives. And but I realize now I'm all over the place, so I just want to go back to the cold plate. So who isn't familiar with the cold plate? Oh, right. Okay, well, great. I don't need to go there then. So, but that has been, we've had our cold plate for probably, you know, 10 to 12 years. And it's been an incredible boon to families. And so they come and borrow it. They pick it up from the garage with the instructions. They take it away. They use it. They bring it back. I don't supervise that family and that cold plate. I find families are very capable. And if they're not, and they're concerned, they'll express that concern. But normally when I say, you can just come and pick it up, but also because it's become part of our culture now. So many families have used that cold plate that it's in common conversation between a lot of people. And we also have the blanket, which is much more expensive from England, the Flexi-Mort, but it's actually much more versatile than the cold plate, because if they're in a coffin, you can put them over there, but normally we don't box people up until the last minute. So we keep people, even for the vigil, they're on a flat board, so the body is always accessible. So if people want to cry on it, or if they want to come and hold hands with that person, or they just want to sit with that person, they don't have to go and look over the coffin like that, because otherwise you're just looking at a wall of timber or cardboard, or as beautiful as the wicker ones are, it's not the same as processing your emotions whilst you see that person. And yeah, and when a body is damaged, so had a few where people have been in car accidents or plane accidents, or they've been pedestrian and dragged along the road and are you know, skinned or twisted. And generally I go in, I look at that body first, and I make an assessment, and I talk to that person, and then I come back out, and again I explain to the people what condition that person is in, and I generally say it's not that bad, because generally their fear of how it's going to be is much worse than the reality, unless it isn't. Unless that body, so for example, I don't go and see people who've been burnt severely, so in an accident when they've been incinerated. I just draw the line at that. I don't need to have that impression in my mind. And so you'll all need to find your point. But I find damaged bodies, I don't find that so distressing, but I really don't need to see a burnt body, I've decided, because along with the burns comes a smell. And we all know that, or many of us will know, the smell of death, that the first time you smell it, it's sort of, you know, I remember I was scrubbing out my nostrils, but that smell was still there. But I showered several times, but it's some sort of primal smell that wakes something up in your brain, that is something in us as animals, that we know that smell of death. And then after that, after a few years, I never even smell it anymore. Because it's not so much the smell, it's my brain recognition of it. So I know it's there, but I'm not smelling it. I find that fascinating, that the brain does that. So I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna check. Does anybody have any questions?
Just have Cara and I think somebody else just asking about the cold plate.
Yeah, so there's a website. So a lot of people have imported cold plates. They come from Holland. They cost about $4,000 to get in, by the time you've purchased it and transported it. But they are an incredible thing, and they're stainless steel, and they go from the shoulder to the knee, and they're about this that sort of wide, body width. The head doesn't need to be on it, because, and so what they do then is they freeze the body, the torso, where all the organs are, because you don't want the organs to deteriorate. And that freeze extends into the limbs and into the head. And you can have it on a table, you can have it on the floor, you can have it in the bed. So often people will keep that person at home on the cold plate in their bed, and people will have that vigil, and they'll be able to sit on the other side of the bed or even sleep with that person if it's, you know, an intimate person to them. And again, with the friend I was speaking about, her partner did that for 4 nights with her, and then on the 5th morning we switched it off, we dressed her again, and we put her in a beautiful wicker coffin like yours, and then took her off to do the ceremony. And I know that without those 4 days and nights, I've watched her partner deal with that death in the most incredible way. And I know that that was a significant part of her ability to deal with it so well, was to spend that time coming to terms with that sudden and shocking death, and having her there and being able to sleep next to her and cry and talk to her body throughout those 4 days, and just set aside a time. So she would keep her to herself in the mornings, and set aside, you know, like 1 till 5 for anybody who wanted to come, so that there weren't people dropping time, a being with time. And that was much more helpful. Otherwise it's exhausting, and you find yourself you're being hospitable, you're having to make cups. You really are the most affected, but you're busy making cups of tea for everyone else and listening to them saying how terrible it is. You know how terrible it is. It's your partner, it's your person. So the cold plate, now there are probably, I would say there's probably about 20 in Australia, and there is a register. A woman, Maria, put together a register of cold plates and where you can find them in your area.
Yeah. Thanks, Zenith. Very inspiring, which is fantastic to hear you again. In lieu of not always having access to a cold plate, what are your thoughts on Techni-Ice or water bottles that are in the freezer?
Great. I mean, or dry ice you could use. So whatever gets you there, you just have to be careful with the fumes from the dry ice that you can burn. So there always even with the cold plate, there always needs to be fabric or something between the body and the plate, like a towel, because the body will freeze through the towel to the plate, but you can't risk skin being stuck to that plate. And so before we had the cold plate, we just used dry ice, we used wet ice, we used frozen 2-litre milk bottle containers. We used whatever and we're really hot here, you know, so we really had to be inventive. But now the cold plate just takes all of that away for days on end. It's just fantastic.
And could you just mention anything about body care at that time? I guess it will depend on the duration that someone is at home. Yeah,
I mean, you really need to keep the torso cold.
Yeah.
And because especially if they've died from a disease that is you know, eating the organs away on the inside, that unless you sort of freeze it or keep it very, very cold, that deterioration will continue. So for every situation, you really need to look at the situation that's in front of you, what the cause of death was, what the condition of the body is, what the external circumstances, is the room cold, is it, you know, people coming in and out. But a lot where we are, we have a lot of what I call pseudo-Buddhists who want to keep the body for 3 days because that is the Buddhist process. But 3 days is actually a long time to keep a body, and to keep attention on that body. But so more often than not, it's like, you know, sometimes 24 hours or 2 days. It's just, and people will know when it's enough time. And it's really good to check in. But I often, when people say, oh, we want to keep the body for 4 days, I just say 4 days is a really long time. And sometimes, you know, because it consumes all of that attention on a technical situation, because you've got to be checking it just to make sure. And sometimes people feel, because the person said that I want to be kept at home for 3 days, but I find 2 days, it depends on the circumstances and how many people you've got coming to visit. But again, and even if you've said 3 days, if you've had enough after a day and a half, let it go. Put it into storage, you know, let someone else take care of that person. So, but body care for a dead body is not so dramatically different unless you've got exceptional circumstances. But you must keep the torso cold, full stop. Yeah.